Hi friends, today I will explain about the options that we can use along with the copy command that we use to load the data into Snowflake tables. First, let's see what is the syntax of copy command with the options. Okay, it looks like this. The general copy command we use to load the data, and then at the end we can specify any options. So what are all the options we can specify in the copy command? Let's see. So these are the copy options we can use. Validation mode, return failed only, on error, force, size limit, truncate columns, enforce length, purge, load uncertain files. So these are all the different options we can use along with the copy command. So let's see with the examples how what is meant by each and every option. So first of all, let's look into the validation mode. Okay, so the syntax of a validation mode will be like this. The copy command, then validation mode equals to return n rows, return errors, return all errors. So we can use any of these option. Validation mode, there are three options available for validation mode. So we can use any of this. Okay, so let's see what is meant by validation mode and what is meant by all these options. Okay, so validation mode is used to just validate the data files instead of loading them into the table. Even though we are mentioning copy into table name here, it will not load the data into table. Okay, whenever we specify validation mode, it will just validate the data files, the input files. If it contains any errors, okay, it will display those errors, okay, based on the option we provide with this validation mode option. Okay, so if we specify return errors, validation mode equals to return errors, it gives all errors in the files. Suppose if we are using some 10 files, I want to load 10 files into the Snowflake table. They are same pattern files. All files are with same pattern. If I want to load all those 10 files into a Snowflake table, and if there are any errors in the files, okay, so all those errors will be returned. Suppose in the file 1 there is some error, in file 2 there is some other error, in file 5 there is some more errors. Okay, so whenever we specify like this validation mode equals to return errors, it will display all the errors, okay, if there are any errors in the file. Okay, otherwise it will say like validation will be successfully completed. That means it will not load the data, but the file, all files are looking good, that means without errors. And second one is return all errors. Okay, so return all errors is similar to return errors, but it also includes the errors from the previously loaded files. If we have used on error equals to continue, that means in the first run I have loaded the data by putting the option on error equals to continue. That means even though there are errors in the some files, those files will get loaded into the table. So those errors also it will capture whenever we specify this return all errors. Even though the files were loaded into the tables previously, but there were some errors exist, we ignored those errors by using on error equals to continue. It will display all these errors as well along with the uh, current errors. It will display all the previous errors also. Okay, the last option is return n rows. That means it will display whenever we put validation mode equals to return n rows, it will display the first n records and fails at the first error record. That means if I when I specify return 10 rows, okay, it will try to fetch the first 10 rows from the file, and whenever first error occurs, the this will fail. That means at the row number 5 or 6, if it is encountering any error, then the command will fail. Okay, so in successful scenario, that means in the first 10 records if there are no errors, then it will display all the 10 rows. So like that we can display first 100 rows, first 1000 rows without loading the data. If I want to see first n rows, okay, so this is the option we can use. But whenever the first error occurs, uh, it will be that statement will be aborted. Okay, so this is about the validation mode, and there are three options for validation mode, and this is the description for each and every option. Okay, next one is return failed only. So there are two options for return failed only, that they are true or false. Okay, so this specifies whether to return only files that have failed to load in the statement result. That means whenever I am running this command copy into this table and return fail only, if I use this option return failed only equals to true, by default it is false. That means uh, it will not return the failed file names. Okay, but the statement only aborted. But whenever we mention returned failed only equals to true, okay, it will display all the files that are containing errors. Suppose I want to load 10 files into a snowflake table, and whenever and out of 10 there are 3 files containing errors. So whenever write a command like this, copy into this one, return failed only equals to true, then it will display, this will display only those 3 files along with the file names. Okay, errors along with the file names. So for each and every file, what is the error we have? Okay, so in our case, if 3 files containing errors, it will display all the 3 file names and what is the error in that file name. Okay, so this is a simple command. By default it is false. Okay, if we specify true, then only it will display all the files that are containing errors. The next one is on error. This is very important and we use this in real time. Okay, lot of times. So the syntax will be like this: copy into the general copy command, and on error equals to, there are 5 options. On error option is supporting 5 values. Okay, continue, skip file number, skip file number percentage, or abort statement. So by default it is abort. So whenever we mention on error equals to abort, or if we don't specify this property completely, so and if there are any errors in the file, okay, so what we are saying, on error equals to, that means whenever some error is occurring, what action you want to take. So that property we have to specify. If we don't specify this on error property, by default it is abort statement. On error equals to abort. That means if there are any errors in the file, the table load will be aborted. That means no records will be loaded into the table. So the other options are like continue, skip file num, and skip file number percentage. So what is mean by continue? So continue, we use this option to skip error records and load remaining records. Suppose consider the same example where we have 10 files, and in one file I have 2 error records, in the other file I have 3 error records, in the other file I have 4 error records. So it will ignore all those errors. Suppose from the file 1 there are 100 records and 2 rows are error records. So it will ignore those 2 records, and it will load successfully remaining 98 records. That means whenever we specify on error equals to continue, it will ignore all the error records and it will load the remaining records. Okay, and the second option is skip file. Okay, so this will skip the files that contain errors. That means suppose let's take our example again. We have 10 files, okay, and out of the 10 files, 2 files are containing errors. So not only the error rows, it will completely skip that file. So out of the 10 file, if 2 files are containing error rows, okay, it will skip that error file completely. Suppose in the error file, in one of the error file, only 2 records are error records, but other records are good records. Even though other records are good, whenever we specify skip file equals to on error equals to skip file, it will completely skip that file. Okay, so skip file underscore num. So what is mean by skip file? On error equals to skip file num. So it is skip a file when the number of error rows found in the file is equal to the is equal to or exceed the specified number. That means whenever I specify skip file underscore 3, in the place of num, whenever I use 3, skip file underscore 3, then in a specific file, if there are more than or equals to 3 errors, okay, then it will skip that file. If there are, suppose I am mentioning skip file 3, and if there are only 2 records in that 2 error records in that file, so it will not skip that file. It will load the file remaining 98 records out of 100. If there are 2 error records, it will skip those 2 error records, and it will the remaining 98 records will be loaded. Suppose whenever I'm mentioning skip file underscore 3, and if there are 4 errors in that file, then this option will completely skip that file. Okay, so this is also same as skip file number percentage. This is also same as the above statement. but here instead of number we are giving number percentage. That means whenever I give skip file underscore 5%. Okay, so what is 5% of 100? 5. So if there are more than or equals to 5 error records, then it will skip that file. Otherwise, this command will load that file. So here the difference is here number, but here percentage. Okay. So the last one is abort statement. This is the default statement. Whenever we mention on error equals to abort, or if we completely don't mention on error option, uh, as the default value is abort statement, it will abort the load, and even a single row will not be loaded into the table. Okay. So this is about on error. The next one is force. So it also contains two values, true or false. Force equals to true or false. So what is meant by force? To load all the files regardless of whether they have been loaded previously. Okay. Default is false. If we don't specify the property, this property in the copy command, the command will not fail, but it will skip loading the file. Suppose we have a file, we have loaded that file and it was successfully loaded in the previous run. Okay, next time another file came. So suppose consider AWS S3 buckets, there is one file we have already loaded that, but we haven't deleted the previous file. Again after some time one more file came there, so there are total two files in the AWS S3 bucket. And whenever I run this command, so if I don't specify force equals to true or false, what it will do, it will skip that file. That means it was already loaded, as Snowflake is maintaining the metadata, copy metadata, so it knows the file was already loaded. So it will skip that file and it will not load that file again. It will load only the second file. But whenever we mention force equals to true, uh, the file will be loaded again. That means it will lead to duplicates. That is okay. But whenever there is a requirement, I want to load all the files even though they were loaded previously, so we can mention force equals to true. Okay. The next one is size limit. This is very simple. So we can use like size limit equals to some number. This size limit, it specifies the maximum size in bytes of data loaded in that copy command. Suppose I have a very large file and I want to load only some 20,000 bytes from that file. So I can mention like size limit equals to 20,000. So this number is in bytes. Whenever I mention 20,000, that means 20,000 bytes. Okay, it specifies the maximum size. Even though the file contains some 100 MB or 200 MB, okay, but only first to 20,000 bytes of that file will be loaded. So when the threshold is exceeded, the copy command operation stops loading. That means after loading the 20,000 bytes of data, the copy command will be the copy command will stop loading the data into that file. Suppose in case of multiple files of the same pattern also, it will stop after the size limit. That means some files can be loaded fully and one file can be loaded partially. That means suppose I have two files. Okay, so each one is of 15,000 bytes. Okay, so total there are 30,000 bytes of files in the AWS S3 bucket. And whenever I run this command with the size limit equals to 20,000, so the first file of 15,000 will be loaded as it is. Still we have 5,000 bytes, right? So from the second file, first 5,000 bytes of data will be loaded into the table, and remaining 10,000 bytes of data will be ignored. So that's why it is saying that means some files can be loaded fully, okay, and one file can be loaded partially. Okay, so this is about size limit. So these two are similar. Truncate columns are enforced length. So when we use this truncate columns are enforced length, suppose I have a table where I specified I have a column called comments, and initially I don't know. So what is the maximum size of that column? Okay, so with the current data we have in that comments column, I have decided the size is 100. Uh, the size is 100. That column size as 100 characters. Okay, suppose it is a string type. I mentioned varchar of 100, but in future for some of the comments it is exceeding. Okay, So that means I'm getting a comment with 110 characters. So in that case, what will happen? So whenever we mention truncate columns equals to true, so the remaining 10 characters will be truncated and only the first 100 characters will be loaded. Otherwise, if we don't mention this property, or whenever we mention truncate columns equals to false, then the copy command will be failed. Okay, so whenever we don't mention copy truncate columns equals to true, or whenever you completely don't put this, that means the default value is false, right? So whenever the column length is exceeding, the copy command will fail. But if we don't want to fail, I want to load only first 100 characters of that comment, then I can specify truncate columns equals to true. So it will truncate that column length till 100 characters, and it will load only first 100 characters. Okay, so this is exactly similar to enforce length is similar to truncate columns. The only thing is here the default value is false, but enforce length the default value is true. Okay, the that means suppose whenever I don't mention enforce length equals to false, then what it will happen, by default is true, the command will fail. But whenever I mention enforce length equals to false, then first 100 characters will be loaded and remaining characters will be truncated. Okay, so both are similar, but act in reverse. Okay, so we have to mention either truncate columns equals to true or enforce length equals to false. Okay, so that is about truncate columns or enforce length. Purge, so what is mean by purge? So whenever we specify this command purge equals to the possible values are true or false. Whenever we specify purge equals to true, that will remove all the files from the stage. Okay, so once the data is successfully loaded into the table, those input files from S3 buckets or from the stage, they will be deleted. Okay, by default it is false. That means whenever we load the data without this command, whenever we write copy command without purge, then by default the false. That means the files will not be removed from the stage. Okay, but whenever we mention purge equals to true, that means after the successful data load, the input files are the files from the stage will be removed. Okay, so the last one is load uncertain files. So what is mean by uncertain? Let's see. Okay, so here also we can write copy command like this, copy into the general copy command along with load uncertain files equals to true or false. Okay, so first of all we have to know what is uncertainty, right? So this command, this option specifies to load the files which the load status is unknown. Okay, so the copy command skips these files by default. Okay, so here what is mean by unknown? Let's see. So what it is saying, it specifies to load the files which the load status is unknown. Suppose I have external stage on AWS. Okay, there are some 10 files. For 10 file out of 10 files, for 2 files the status is unknown. Okay, so we have to mention, we have to load those unknown status files or not. So whenever we mention load uncertain files equals to true, even the status is unknown, those files will be loaded again. Okay, if we don't specify this property, as the default value is false, the copy command will skip these files by default. Okay, now whenever we say status is unknown, what is mean by unknown? Okay, so the load status is unknown if all the following conditions are true. So whenever we need to decide a file is with the status unknown, okay, it should meet three conditions, below three conditions. What are these three conditions? Okay, so the first condition is the file's last modified date is older than 64 days. That means the file has come into stage 64 days back. This is the first condition. The initial set of data was loaded into the table more than 64 days. So that means whenever the file came 64 days back and the data was loaded 64 days back, but still the file is present in that stage. Okay, and in the file, if the file was already loaded successfully into the table, this event occurred more than 64 days, so whatever I just mentioned, so the file is still there in that stage, but the table was loaded successfully. The file was successfully loaded into the table, and that event happened 64 days earlier. That means 64 days back we have successfully loaded that file into a table, but still the file is present in the stage. So we call that as unknown. Whenever a file is meeting all these three criterias, we call them as unknown files. So whenever I mention load uncertain files equals to true, all these files with the status unknown also loaded into the table. Okay, so this is about uncertain files, and these are the different commands we can use along with the copy command. Okay, so I'm not executing the queries in this session, but I can go through the query file. So I will mention all these queries in the description of the video. Okay, okay, so what are the options? Let's see. So whatever we discussed in the PPT, let's see in the practical. So it will take a lot of time to execute all this command, but simply I can go through the queries. So, and I will mention this, I will give these queries in the description of the video, so you can take them and practice. So first, I'm creating the required database and schemas. So create database if not exist MyDB. So I'm creating a database with the name MyDB if it is not present already. Also, I'm creating one schema called external stages to store all the external stages I'm going to create. Okay. So the first, let's see about validation mode. Okay, so if we want to practice, first of all we have to create some tables, right? So I'm creating a table with this name table underscore orders in the public schema of MyDB database. It contains order ID, amount, profit, quantity, category and subcategory. Okay, now let's see. So we are discussing about validation mode, right? So first case we'll see files without errors. So if we get files without errors, what will happen? Okay, so first of all I'm creating a stage object. So this is the publicly accessible AWS bucket. That's why I'm not giving any storage integration object and other properties. Simply I can read this file and load into this the table we just had created. Okay, I'm giving the stage name as this one, create or replace stage. Okay, this is the stage name, and this is the URL of publicly accessible S3 bucket. Okay, so in this if we want to practice this copy options, so they have given some sample files each in the different folder. So here you can see size, in the next one you can see in the return failed folder. Okay, like that. So we can take these files and we can practice. Okay, so after creating the stage object, if you want to see what are the files present in that stage, okay, you can execute this list command. Then let's see. So we are writing this copy command, and I'm mentioning validation mode equals to return errors. So if there are any errors in the file, okay, it will display. So first we are considering files without errors, right? So the files we are loading here, this order file from this folder, it doesn't contain any errors. So whenever we run this command, nothing will come in the output. Okay, it will say like validation is successful, something like that, because there are no errors in the file. And whenever I mention like this validation mode equals to return 10 rows, as there are no errors present in the file, it will give me just 10 rows in the output. The 10 rows will not be loaded. So whenever, remember, whenever we use this validation mode, the data will not be loaded into the table. It will just display the errors or the requested number of rows. Okay, here I am requesting 10 rows. It will display 10 rows. Okay, so in the second case, so let's consider some files with errors and what will happen. Okay, so for this example, I am creating a stage object with this name sample AWS stage 2, and I am taking the file from the publicly accessible S3 bucket. Okay, and from the folder returned failed. Okay, so whenever you run this command, it will show all the files present in this folder in the S3 bucket. Okay, and whenever I run this command, now we are sure right, so there are some errors in the file. So whenever I run this command, it will display all the errors present in the file. Okay, and whenever I run this command, suppose my fifth record is containing error, so what it will say, it will fail, because in the we are requesting 10 rows. Out of the first 10 rows, there are some error records. That's why it will fail. But if there are no errors in the first 10 rows, it will display all the 10 rows in the output. Okay, So this is how we can practice validation mode command. The next one is returned failed only. So I already explained, if there are some errors in the files, okay, out of 10 files, 3 files are containing errors, it will display all the 3 file names along with the errors present in that file. Okay, so you can practice. I am creating this table, create or replace table at the same table I am using. Okay, I am creating a stage object from this S3 bucket and from this folder. Okay, and I am just mentioning return failed equals failed only equals to true. You run this, you will get to know, it will display all the files containing errors along with the errors. Okay, and the next one is on error. So we know, right, there are 5 options for this on error. Okay, so the same way I'm creating a table and a staged object, okay, with the with this return failed, okay, and I'm trying to first of all, I'm not mentioning on error property. So let's see what will happen. Okay, so you execute this command and you will get to know. So the load will failed because some of the files present in this S3 bucket and this folder contain error. So whenever you don't mention on error property, by default it will take like on error equals to abort statement and the data will not be loaded. And whenever you mention like this on error equals to continue, and suppose if there are 5 error records out of 100, those 5 records will be skipped and the rest 95 records will be loaded into the table. Okay, so this is about on error. And if you have multiple files, you can practice skip file, skip file number, skip file number percentage, all those options. Okay, and the next one is force. I already explained, right, what is when we use this force. Suppose if there is a file we have already loaded and I want to load that file again. So whenever we don't mention this force equals to true command, what will happen? Okay, okay, so here in the first case I'm creating a table, then I'm creating a stage object, then so first of all I'm loading the file. Okay, this file I'm loading into this table. So what will happen, the table will be loaded, the file will be loaded, and you try to load the same file. And let's observe what will happen to the copy command. So whenever you try to load the same file again, okay, so with the same stage object, it will fail because the file was already loaded, right? Oh, okay, so the copy command will not fail, but it will skip that file. Okay, if you want to, okay, file. Okay, so whenever we mention this in the next command, you try to run the same copy command by putting force equals to true, and observe what will happen. So even though the file was already loaded, and whenever we mention source force equals to true, the file will be loaded again, and the table will contain the duplicate records. Okay, suppose if there are 100 records in the file, 200 the 100 records will be loaded twice in the table. That means it will contain 200 rows. Okay, so and the next one is truncate columns. So how you can practice this? So if you observe here, so in this, whenever I am creating this table here in all above example, I am putting this category and subcategory as varchar of 30. Okay, but if you see this example, okay, I'm putting category of varchar 10 only. That means definitely I know there are records with more than 10 characters in the category field. So whenever this is just for our testing, so I'm creating a table like this, and whenever I try to load the data using the copy command, it will fail because the category column, the value length is exceeding the table field length. Okay, the length of the data we are getting from the file is exceeding the length of the field we have created in the table. Okay, so this will fail because here I am not mentioning any property with the truncate columns. So whenever so the next time what I will say, with the truncate columns property, I am running the same command with the truncate columns property by specifying truncate columns equals to true. So whenever you run this command, okay, so what will happen, it will truncate. Suppose um, The category column contains 30 characters. As I mentioned, only 10 characters here. The first 10 characters of the out of 30 characters will be loaded, and remaining characters will be truncated. Okay. So this is about truncate columns, and the next one is size limit. So I have explained already, right? So suppose if I want to load only first 20,000 bytes or first 30,000 bytes of a file, okay, for some sample testing, okay. So suppose if the file is of 10 GB, okay, or at least 1 GB, but I don't want to load all the files for my testing. I want to load only some partial data from that file. So what I can do, I can mention size limit equals to 30,000 bytes only, or 50,000 bytes. Okay, like that we can mention the size, and we can load the partial data. Okay. So this is about the copy commands. So here I'm not explaining some of the copy commands that were present in the PPT, like this one enforce length. This is very similar to truncate columns. Okay, and load uncertain files. I am not explaining because I don't have files with unknown status. That means the file present in the S3 bucket for last 64 days, or it was loaded successfully 64 days back. I don't have files with that scenario. That's why I'm uh, not prepared any command for this. But you can at least get the description from this PPT. Okay. So these are the different copy command options. Okay, and these are very important. So we use most of them in our real-time project implementation. Like this is very important, truncate columns. Okay, and this on error is very important. So what happens when there are some error records in the files? How to take care, and if we want to validate the input files, so we can use this validation mode command. These are really important commands in the real time. You first go through this video and take the queries from the description of this video, and you can practice. Okay, thank you.
Thanks for watching this video. Please subscribe to my channel, and if you have any doubts, you can reach me on this email ID. Thank you.